Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to Podcast Stories channel. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe. Enjoy the show. I had always held a deep belief in the sanctity of marriage and the strength of love to conquer any challenges life might present. My wife, Charlotte, and I had been together for 7 years and married for 4. Throughout that time, I never once questioned that we were meant to be. Our love was the stuff of fairy tales, the kind of connection that deepens with each passing year. We created a life together, piece by piece, moment by moment, until it felt like we were a single entity moving through life in perfect harmony. Charlotte was my everything. She had an extraordinary ability to light up any room she entered. Her smile was so warm and inviting that it could brighten even the gloomiest day. When she laughed, it felt as though the world itself paused to enjoy the melody, chasing away any lingering darkness. Her chestnut hair, as soft as silk, framed a face that was both delicate and strong, a true reflection of who she was. She was not only my partner and confidant but also the mother of our son, Jack, who had just turned 3 and was the center of our universe. Our life together seemed like a dream. We lived in a charming house just outside the city, far enough to escape the noise and chaos but close enough to stay connected to our vibrant life. Our home was a haven, filled with the sound of Jack's laughter, the aroma of Charlotte's cooking, and the quiet moments of togetherness that I cherished deeply. Each morning, I would wake up to find Charlotte sleeping peacefully beside me, her hair spread out on the pillow, her breathing soft and rhythmic. I would lie there for a few moments, simply watching her, feeling a profound sense of contentment and love. Work was rewarding, though not always easy. I managed a small but successful IT solutions business for other small companies. It might not have been glamorous, but it was my creation, something I had built from scratch. It provided me the flexibility to spend quality time with my family. I wasn't one to chase after the next big deal at the office for long hours. I preferred being at home with Charlotte and Jack, making the most of our time together. Charlotte was always supportive of my work. Even when the stress began to seep into our lives, she would listen to me vent, offer encouragement, and always knew just how to make things seem more manageable. Despite the demands of work and parenting, Charlotte and I always found time for each other. We had a weekly date night, a tradition from when we first started dating, and we never missed it. Sometimes we would dine out at a fancy restaurant, other times, we would stay in, cook together, and watch a movie after Jack went to bed. It didn't matter what we did, as long as we were together. Those nights were a reminder of why we fell in love, offering a chance to reconnect amidst the whirlwind of daily life. Lately, though, it seemed like the chaos was winning. Jack was growing fast, and with that came a new set of challenges, sleepless nights, tantrums, and the constant worry that we weren't doing enough for him. My business was thriving, but that also meant more responsibilities, more clients to keep happy, and more hours spent worrying about the future. Charlotte was managing it all with her usual grace, but I could tell it was wearing on her. She was more tired than usual, more distracted, and there was a certain distance in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. We had talked about taking a honeymoon ever since we got married, but there had always been something that got in the way: work, Jack, life in general. Now, with our son getting older and more independent, it felt like the right time to finally make that dream a reality. We started planning the trip with a sense of excitement that had been missing for a while, like we were reconnecting with the part of ourselves that had been pushed aside in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. We talked about all the places we could go and all the things we could do. For the first time in months, I saw that old spark in Charlotte's eyes. I wanted to make this trip special, something that would remind Charlotte of how much she meant to me, how much I loved her. I decided to surprise her with a gift, something that would symbolize our love, our commitment to each other. Jewelry seemed like the perfect choice, something timeless and beautiful, just like her. But I wasn't sure exactly what to get her, so I reached out to an old friend, Irina, who had a real talent for picking out the perfect piece of jewelry. We hadn't seen each other in years, but I knew she would know just what to do. We met at a little restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the lighting was soft and intimate, and the tables were spaced far enough apart that you could have a private conversation without worrying about being overheard. I arrived a little early, nervous and excited all at once. I hadn't seen Irina in ages and wondered how much she had changed. When she walked in, I was relieved to see that she was still the same, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her blue eyes sparkling with the same energy. I remembered we hugged, exchanged pleasantries, and then got down to business. I pulled out the necklace I had picked out, a delicate chain with a sapphire pendant, something that reminded me of the color of Charlotte's eyes. Irina took it in her hands, examining it with a practiced eye, and then smiled. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "Charlotte is going to love it." I felt a surge of pride as I imagined Charlotte's face when I gave it to her. We spent the next hour catching up, reminiscing about old times, and laughing at the memories we had shared. Irina had always been a good friend, someone I could trust, and it felt good to reconnect with her, even if only for a little while. When I got home that evening, Charlotte was waiting for me, as she always was, with a smile that made my heart swell. We talked about the trip, going over the details with a sense of anticipation that made everything seem more real. I was in charge of choosing the destination, a secluded spot by the sea, far from the noise and stress of the city, while Charlotte would handle the organization, something she excelled at. We made a good team, each playing to our strengths, working together to create something beautiful. But as the days went by, I started to notice little things, small changes in Charlotte's behavior that I couldn't quite explain. She was more distracted, often lost in her own thoughts, her attention elsewhere even when we were together. She started staying out later than usual, offering vague explanations that didn't seem to add up. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just the stress of planning the trip and the excitement of finally taking the honeymoon we had always wanted. But the nagging feeling that something was off began to grow, slowly eating away at the sense of peace I had always felt in our relationship. The day we had long anticipated finally arrived, our honeymoon, the trip we had been dreaming about ever since we exchanged vows. It felt surreal as we packed our bags, leaving behind the routines of daily life and our little boy, Jack, who was now in the capable hands of his nanny. Jack was only 3, too young to understand why we were leaving, but he waved us off with a smile as the nanny held him in her arms. Charlotte reassured me, as always, that everything would be fine. I kissed Jack on the forehead, promising him we'd be back soon before turning to Charlotte, feeling a mix of excitement and anticipation. A sleek black limousine pulled up to our house, an elegant surprise arranged by Charlotte. The driver, a tall, polished man in a crisp suit, stepped out and opened the door for us with a respectful nod. As we slid into the luxurious back seat, I couldn't help but be impressed. The interior was as lavish as the exterior, soft leather seats that molded to our bodies, ambient lighting that bathed everything in a warm, intimate glow. Charlotte looked radiant beside me, her chestnut hair tumbling over her shoulders, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She took my hand in hers, and as the car began to move, we both let out a sigh of contentment. The cityscape blurred outside the tinted windows, but inside the limousine, we were in our own world. We talked and laughed, reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. Charlotte teased me about our first date and how nervous I had been thinking about how I almost spilled wine on her dress. We joked about the sleepless nights we had endured with Jack and how far we had come since those early days of parenthood. But most of all, we talked about the future, the life we were building and the dreams we still had to chase. This trip was meant to be a celebration of everything we had achieved together, a chance to reconnect and focus on each other without the distractions of work and parenthood. As we discussed our plans for the future, I felt a surge of love for Charlotte. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand resting on my chest, and I knew that this was exactly where I was meant to be. When we arrived at the airport, the bustle of travelers around us seemed distant and irrelevant. We breezed through check-in, our first-class tickets granting us a smooth, almost effortless journey through security and onto the plane. As we settled into our spacious seats, I caught Charlotte's eye, and we exchanged a smile that spoke volumes. This was the start of something special. The flight itself was an experience in luxury, champagne, gourmet meals, and the kind of comfort that made the hours slip by unnoticed. We talked quietly, our voices low as we planned out the details of our trip. The destination was a secluded resort on a remote beach, a place far removed from the crowded tourist spots. It was the kind of place you see in magazines: pristine white sand, crystal clear water, and private villas hidden among lush tropical gardens. When we landed, another limousine was waiting for us, even more elegant than the first. The drive to the resort took us through breathtaking landscapes, with the sun setting in the distance, casting a golden hue over everything. Charlotte rested her head on my shoulder as we drove, and for a moment, I was overwhelmed by how perfect everything felt. The future seemed bright and full of promise, and I couldn't wait to share it with her. The resort was everything we had hoped for and more. As we stepped out of the limo, we were greeted by staff who welcomed us with cold towels and tropical drinks. They led us to our villa, a stunning retreat with a private pool and an unobstructed view of the ocean. It was a place that seemed almost too perfect to be real, the kind of setting where time slows down and the worries of the world fade away. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided to have dinner on the terrace of our villa. The staff had arranged a candlelit table overlooking the ocean, complete with a violinist who played soft, romantic melodies. The air was warm, the scent of the sea mingling with the fragrant flowers that surrounded our villa. The atmosphere was intoxicating, every detail meticulously planned to create an evening we would never forget. We sat across from each other, our conversation flowing as easily as the wine in our glasses. Charlotte looked beautiful in the candlelight, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames, her smile soft and content. We talked about everything: our hopes, our dreams, our plans for the future. I found myself lost in the moment, in the perfection of it all. The violinist's music wove through our conversation, adding an extra layer of intimacy to the evening. As the night progressed, I knew the time had come to give Charlotte the necklace I had chosen for her. I had been waiting for the right moment, and this felt like it. The setting was perfect, the mood was right, and I wanted to show her just how much she meant to me. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the small velvet box. But as I pulled it out, ready to present it to her, something caught my attention, a shift in Charlotte's expression. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw it clearly, a smirk curled at the corner of her lips, a look that was entirely out of place in this romantic setting. It was as if she knew something I didn't, something that gave her a strange sense of satisfaction. My heart skipped a beat, confusion rippling through me. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, but before I could speak, the violinist stopped playing. Time seemed to freeze as I turned toward him, just in time to see him lift his violin high above his head. My mind struggled to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. It didn't make sense, but there was no time to react. The violin came crashing down toward me with brutal force. Instinct kicked in, and I managed to raise my arm in defense, the impact sending a sharp pain through my wrist. The violin shattered on impact, and I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through me. I was dazed, trying to make sense of the situation, but years of wrestling training took over. I lashed out, catching the violinist with a swift punch that sent him sprawling to the ground. My mind was racing. Why had he attacked me? What the hell was going on? I turned to Charlotte, expecting to see fear or shock in her eyes, but what I saw instead froze the blood in my veins. She was clapping in slow, deliberate applause, the smirk on her face now a full mocking smile. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to comprehend what was happening, but before I could process it, 3 men emerged from the shadows, surrounding me. They were big, intimidating, and their intentions were clear. I barely had time to brace myself before they lunged at me, fists flying. The first blow caught me in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me, but I fought back with everything I had. I was outnumbered, but years of training had made me strong and resilient. I landed a few solid hits, but there were too many of them, and they quickly overwhelmed me, forcing me to the ground. I struggled, trying to break free, but they held me down, their hands like iron grips on my arms and legs. My vision blurred as another punch connected with my jaw, sending a burst of pain through my head. I could hear Charlotte's laughter above the chaos, a sound that cut through me like a knife. This couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be our honeymoon, our time to reconnect, to celebrate our love. As I lay there pinned to the ground, I watched in horror as Charlotte sauntered over to the men. She didn't even glance in my direction as she began to strip off her dress, the smirk never leaving her face. The men released me, stepping back as she moved between them, her intention all too clear. My heart shattered as I realized what was happening, what she was about to do. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything to stop this nightmare from unfolding, but my body wouldn't respond. I was too battered, too broken, both physically and emotionally. All I could do was watch as Charlotte gave herself to them right there in front of me, as if I didn't exist, as if our love, our life together, meant nothing. And that was when it hit me. This wasn't a random attack. Charlotte had planned this, orchestrated every detail with cold, calculating precision. I had been so blind, so naive, and now I was paying the price for it in the most brutal way imaginable. The world seemed to move in slow motion as I lay there on the cold ground, my body bruised and aching from the relentless beating I had just endured. Above me, the night sky was obscured by the twisted, distorted images of what had been my perfect honeymoon, now a nightmare I couldn't escape. The resort, the dinner, the beautiful setting, everything had been a lie, a cruel setup designed to shatter the illusion of happiness that I had foolishly clung to. Charlotte stood before me, her chestnut hair cascading down her bare back as she stripped off the last of her dress, revealing the body that I had once adored. A body that was now being offered up to strangers right in front of my eyes. The smirk on her face had turned into a wicked smile, a smile that spoke of betrayal, pain, and something far darker. She didn't even look at me as she moved toward the man who had just finished beating me into submission. I tried to move, to get up, to stop this madness, but my body refused to obey. My muscles screamed in protest, every inch of me battered and broken. My mind, however, was a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, and a deep, gut-wrenching despair. I had never felt this way before. How had it come to this? How had everything gone so horribly wrong? Charlotte didn't waste any time. She stepped up to the first man, a tall, broad-shouldered brute, who had been the first to land a punch on me. He looked down at her with a leering grin, his eyes filled with lust and cruelty. Without a word, she reached out and grabbed him, pulling him close, her lips crashing into his with a hunger that I had never seen from her before. My heart twisted in agony as I watched, powerless to stop it. The man responded eagerly, his hands roaming over Charlotte's body with a roughness that made me sick to my stomach. She didn't resist, in fact, she seemed to encourage it, moaning softly as he touched her, as if this was something she had wanted all along. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, the mother of my child. And here she was, betraying me in the most brutal way possible. As the first man began to undress, another one stepped up behind Charlotte, pulling her hair back and kissing her neck with a ferocity that made me want to vomit. She leaned into him, her body arching as she responded to his touch, her moans growing louder. The two men worked in tandem, stripping her completely bare, their hands and mouths all over her as if I wasn't even there. I tried to speak, to call out to her, but my voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Charlotte, why? Why are you doing this?" She didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge my presence as she turned her attention to the third man, who was already undressing himself, his eyes locked onto her with a predatory gaze. He approached her with a confidence that made my blood boil, but there was nothing I could do to stop him. He grabbed her roughly, pulling her to him, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him with the same intensity she had shown the others. It was then that the violinist, the man who had struck the first blow, reappeared. His face was twisted in a sick grin as he approached the group, his violin discarded on the ground beside me, shattered like the remnants of my dignity. He watched for a moment, seemingly enjoying the scene before him, and then stepped in, joining the men in their violation of my wife. They were like a pack of wolves, taking turns with her, using her in ways that made my stomach churn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Charlotte looked down at me. Her eyes were wild, her face flushed with arousal, but there was something else there too, something cold and calculating. You want to know why I'm doing this? She asked, her voice dripping with venom. You really don't know? I managed to shake my head, my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of it all. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that cut through the night. I saw you, at the restaurant. I saw you with that woman. For a moment, I didn't understand. My thoughts were sluggish, disjointed, struggling to keep up with what she was saying. Then it hit me, Irina. She was talking about Irina, my old friend, the woman I had meant to help me pick out the necklace I was planning to give to Charlotte, the necklace that was now lying forgotten in the grass beside me. Charlotte, no, it wasn't like that, I croaked, my voice barely audible over the sounds of the men grunting and groaning as they continued to defile her. She was just a friend. I wanted to surprise you with the necklace. It was for you. But she didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, in the twisted smirk that remained on her lips. Liar, she spat, her voice filled with disgust. I saw the way you looked at her. I saw the way she smiled at you. You think I'm stupid? You think I didn't know what was going on? Charlotte, please, I swear it wasn't like that, I pleaded, desperation clawing at my insides. I love you. I only love you. Love, she sneered, the words sounding like poison on her tongue. You don't know the first thing about love. You're just like every other man, lying, cheating, thinking you can have whatever you want without consequences. The men around her laughed, the sound echoing in the night as if they were in on some sick joke that I wasn't privy to. My mind reeled, trying to find the words, the arguments that would make her see the truth, but nothing came. My body was broken, my spirit crushed, and the sight of my wife, the woman I had devoted my life to, giving herself to these men in front of me left me hollow. The violinist stepped forward, grabbing Charlotte by the waist and spinning her around so that she was facing me. Look at him, he whispered in her ear loud enough for me to hear. Look at your husband. Is this what you wanted? To break him? Charlotte's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, regret, doubt, maybe even the love that had once been there. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold, hard resolve that had driven her to this point. I want him to feel what I felt, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I want him to know what it's like to be betrayed, to be humiliated. She turned back to the men, pulling the violinist down to her and kissing him with a passion that made me want to scream. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of rage and sorrow that threatened to tear me apart. I wanted to fight, to drag those bastards off her, to make her see that she was wrong, that I had never betrayed her. But I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, my mind numb with shock. Charlotte, I whispered, the last vestiges of hope slipping away. Please. But she didn't hear me. She was lost to the madness, to the darkness that had consumed her. As the men took their turns with her, as she moaned and writhed in their arms, I realized that the woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. All that was left was the cold, broken shell of a marriage that had once been shattered by a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control, leaving nothing but pain and devastation in its wake. The scene unfolding before my eyes was a twisted nightmare, a grotesque display of betrayal and degradation that I could barely comprehend. Charlotte, the woman I had loved with every fiber of my being, was lost to me, consumed by the darkness she had invited into our lives. The pain of seeing her like this, of watching her give herself to those men as if I didn't exist, was more than I could bear. Every breath I took was a struggle, my ribs aching from the brutal beating I had endured. My head throbbed with a dull, relentless pain, but it was nothing compared to the agony in my chest, the hollow ache where my heart had once been. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape this living hell before it destroyed me completely. Gathering what little strength I had left, I began to inch away from the scene, my movements slow and deliberate. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest, but I forced myself to keep going, crawling across the grass away from the villa, away from Charlotte. I had to leave before I completely broke, before the last remnants of my sanity were stripped away. As I dragged myself through the shadows, I kept my eyes fixed on the road in the distance, the narrow strip of pavement that was my only hope of escape. The night was dark, the sky obscured by clouds, but I could still make out the faint glow of headlights in the distance, the occasional flash of a passing car. If I could just reach the road, I might be able to get away, to put this nightmare behind me. But I wasn't moving fast enough. The pain in my ribs made every breath a struggle, and my vision swam with each step I took. I tried to push the pain away, to focus on the task at hand, but it was no use. My body was failing me, and with every agonizing movement, I felt myself slipping further into despair. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, the sound of heavy footsteps growing louder as they closed in on me. Panic surged through me as I realized that one of the men had noticed my escape and was coming after me. I couldn't let him catch me. I couldn't let them drag me back into that hell. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed myself to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me, and began to stagger toward the road. "Where do you think you're going?" the man called out, his voice filled with cruel amusement. I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I just kept moving, each step an agonizing struggle as I forced my battered body to obey. I could hear him getting closer, his footsteps pounding against the ground, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. He was gaining on me, and I knew that if he caught me, I wouldn't have the strength to fight him off. I reached the edge of the road just as he lunged at me, his hand closing around my shoulder with a grip like iron. The force of the impact sent us both crashing to the ground, my body slamming into the pavement with a sickening thud. Pain exploded in my side, and I let out a strangled cry, the air knocked from my lungs. But I couldn't give up now. I couldn't let this be the end. The man straddled me, his fist drawn back, ready to deliver another brutal punch. But I wasn't going to let him win. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I twisted my body, bucking him off balance. His fist glanced off my cheek, the impact jarring but not as powerful as it could have been. I used the momentum to roll us over, reversing our positions. Now I was on top. Years of wrestling instinct took over as I drove my fist into his face with all the force I could muster. His nose crunched under the impact, blood spurting from the wound as he howled in pain. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to finish this, to make sure he wouldn't be able to follow me, wouldn't drag me back into that nightmare. Blow after blow rained down on him, each one fueled by a mix of fear, rage, and desperation. His struggles grew weaker with each hit until finally, he lay still beneath me, unconscious or worse. I didn't care. All that mattered was that he wasn't moving, wasn't a threat anymore. Gasping for breath, I staggered to my feet, my body trembling with exhaustion and pain. I couldn't stay here, I had to keep moving, had to get as far away as possible. The road stretched out before me, deserted and dark, but it was my only hope. I stumbled onto the pavement, the cold, hard surface, sending jolts of pain through my feet with every step. My vision was blurred, my head swimming, but I forced myself to keep going. The distant sound of an approaching car caught my attention, and I turned toward it, waving my arms frantically, desperate for help. The headlights grew brighter as the car approached, its engine roaring in the stillness of the night. For a brief moment, I thought I was saved, that this nightmare was finally over. But then something went wrong. The driver didn't see me in time, or maybe I had misjudged the distance. I couldn't be sure. All I knew was that the car wasn't slowing down. I tried to move to get out of the way, but my body was too slow, too battered to respond. The headlights blinded me, and before I could react, the car slammed into me with bone-shattering force. Pain exploded through my body, a blinding, white-hot agony that eclipsed everything else. I was thrown into the air, my limbs flailing uselessly as I tumbled back down to the ground. The impact when I hit the pavement was like nothing I had ever felt before, a crushing, all-encompassing pain that radiated through every part of me. My vision darkened, the world around me fading into a hazy blur of lights and shadows. I could hear the distant screech of brakes, the sound of the car skidding to a halt, but it all felt so far away, like it was happening to someone else. As I lay there, broken and bleeding on the side of the road, the cold reality of what had happened began to sink in. This was it. This was the end. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it had all led to this moment, and there was nothing left for me now. The darkness closed in around me, the last remnants of consciousness slipping away as I finally gave in to the void. When I opened my eyes, the bright lights of the hospital room blurred into focus, and a sterile smell of antiseptic filled my senses. The pain in my body was overwhelming, a constant, dull throb that radiated from every part of me. For a moment, I was disoriented, struggling to remember where I was and why. But then, like a dam breaking, the memories came flooding back: Charlotte, the betrayal, the beating, and the car hitting me. My heart raced as the events of that night replayed in my mind. I had been left broken and bleeding on the side of the road, but somehow, I had survived. The thought of Charlotte and what she had done twisted in my gut like a knife. But then another thought hit me, one that sent a fresh wave of panic through my veins: Jack, our son. Jack was at home. He hadn't been with us on the honeymoon, thank God, but that meant he was with her now. I had no idea what she might do or where she had gone. I had to know if Jack was safe. I needed to get in touch with him to make sure he was okay. Desperation surged through me, overpowering the pain, as I reached for the call button beside my bed, pressing it with shaky fingers. A nurse appeared almost immediately, her expression concerned as she approached my bedside. "You're awake," she said softly, her voice calm. "How are you feeling? You've been through a lot." "Where is she?" I rasped, my throat dry and my voice barely audible. "Charlotte, where is she?" The nurse's face faltered, and she looked down at the floor as if reluctant to answer. "Sir, your wife, she left shortly after you were brought in. She took a flight back home." My blood ran cold. Charlotte had flown home. My mind raced, connecting the dots. If she was back home, then Jack. I couldn't finish the thought. I had to know if he was safe, how to make sure she hadn't done anything to hurt him. "I need a phone," I demanded, my voice trembling with urgency. "I need to call home. My son. I need to know if he's okay." The nurse hesitated, clearly concerned about my condition, but she could see the desperation in my eyes. She nodded and handed me the phone from the table beside my bed. My hands shook as I took it, dialing the number for our home. The phone rang in my ear, each ring feeling like an eternity. Finally, the call connected, and the familiar voice of the nanny who had been caring for Jack while we were away answered. "Hello?" "It's me," I said quickly, relief washing over me at the sound of her voice. "Is Jack okay? Is he there?" "Yes, he's here," she replied, her tone reassuring. "He's fine, playing in the living room right now." "What's going on? Is everything okay?" A wave of relief crashed over me momentarily, easing the tension in my chest. Jack was safe, at least for now. But the thought of Charlotte being there with him, possibly planning to take him, sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. "Listen to me," I said urgently to Charlotte, "she's on her way home. You need to keep Jack safe. Do you understand? Don't let her take him anywhere until I get there. Call the police if you have to, but don't let her near him." The nanny's voice wavered with concern. "What happened? Why are you in the hospital? What should I do?" "Just keep him safe," I insisted, my voice trembling. "I'm going to call the police now. Stay with Jack. I'll be there as soon as I can." I ended the call and immediately dialed the police, my heart pounding in my chest. When the operator answered, I spoke quickly, explaining the situation as best I could. "My wife, she's flying back home and she might be a danger to our son. I need someone to go to my house and make sure my son is safe. Please, you have to help me." The operator took down my information, assuring me that they would send someone to the house immediately. But the fear gnawed at me. What if they didn't get there in time? What if Charlotte had already taken Jack by the time they arrived? I handed the phone back to the nurse, my hands still shaking. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Charlotte was gone, but she wasn't out of my life, not yet. She was headed home to our son, and I had no idea what she might do. But one thing was clear, I couldn't let her take Jack. I couldn't let her destroy our family any more than she already had. "I need to get out of here," I said, trying to push myself up despite the pain that tore through my body. "I need to get home." The nurse placed a gentle hand on my arm, her eyes filled with understanding. "Sir, I know you're worried, but you've been seriously injured. You need to rest and let the police handle this." "I can't just stay here," I insisted, my voice breaking. "My son needs me. Please, I have to go." She sighed, clearly torn between her duty to care for me and the urgency of my situation. "I'll make sure the police have all the information they need," she said softly. "But please try to stay calm. You're going to need your strength if you're going to help your son." Her words struck a chord within me. She was right, I was no good to Jack if I was too broken to fight for him. But every second that ticked by felt like an eternity, another moment in which Charlotte could be getting closer to him. The thought of her taking Jack away from me, of never seeing him again, was unbearable. As I lay back against the pillows, forcing myself to take deep, steadying breaths, I vowed that I wouldn't stop until I had my son safely back in my arms. Charlotte had betrayed me in the worst possible way, but she wouldn't get away with it. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I would fight for Jack no matter what it took. The next day, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The pain was still there, a constant reminder of the beating I had endured, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I had to get home. I had to protect Jack. The thought of him being anywhere near Charlotte made my blood run cold, but it also fueled me with determination. I wasn't going to let her take him, not now, not ever. I forced myself out of bed, pushing past the protests of the nurses and the throbbing pain in my ribs. Every movement was a struggle, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. I had to get back to my son. The doctors were hesitant to discharge me, but I insisted, signing whatever forms they put in front of me without a second thought. I couldn't stay in that hospital another minute, knowing that Charlotte was on her way to our home. Once I was discharged, I made my way to the airport as quickly as my battered body would allow. Every step was agony, but I pushed through it, my mind solely focused on getting home. I booked the earliest flight, my heart pounding with anxiety as I sat in the terminal waiting for the plane to board. Each minute felt like an eternity, the fear gnawing at me that I wouldn't make it in time, that Charlotte would reach Jack before I could stop her. The flight itself was a blur, the hours stretching out endlessly as I stared out the window, my thoughts consumed with what lay ahead. I replayed the events of the last few days over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing seemed real. The betrayal, the violence, the fear, it was like something out of a nightmare, but I couldn't wake up. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of Jack, the need to protect him from whatever madness had taken hold of Charlotte. When the plane finally touched down, I wasted no time pushing through the crowd as quickly as I could manage. My body protested with every step, but I forced myself to keep going, to ignore the pain. I needed to get home before Charlotte did. I needed to be there for Jack. As the taxi pulled up in front of our house, I felt a surge of relief wash over me. The police were already there, their cars parked in the driveway, officers standing by, waiting. They had taken my warning seriously and were ready. My heart pounded as I stepped out of the cab, my legs unsteady beneath me. I could see the nanny standing on the porch, holding Jack close, her face a mix of fear and relief as she saw me. "Daddy!" Jack cried out, wriggling out of the nanny's arms and running toward me. I dropped to my knees, wincing as the pain shot through my ribs, but I didn't care. I caught Jack in my arms, holding him tightly as tears of relief streamed down my face. He was safe. He was here in my arms where he belonged. "Daddy, I missed you," Jack whispered, his little arms wrapped around my neck. "I missed you too, buddy," I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so much." I held him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, feeling the warmth of his little body against mine. For a moment, everything else faded away, the pain, the fear, the nightmare I had lived through. All that mattered was that Jack was safe, that I was here with him. But the moment was short-lived. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me back to reality. I looked up, my heart pounding in my chest as I saw Charlotte's car coming to a stop. She stepped out, her eyes immediately locking on Jack and me. There was no trace of the cruel smirk she had worn the night before, no sign of the cold, calculating woman who had orchestrated my humiliation. Instead, she looked desperate, wild, her eyes wide with panic as she took in the scene before her. "Jack," she called out, her voice trembling as she took a step toward us. "Jack, come here, baby." But Jack didn't move. He clung to me, his little arms tightening around my neck as he buried his face in my shoulder. He could sense the tension, the danger, even if he didn't fully understand what was happening. "Ma'am, stop right there," one of the officers said, stepping forward with his hand raised. "You need to stay where you are." Charlotte froze, her eyes darting between the officers and me. For a moment, it looked like she might try to run, but then she seemed to realize there was nowhere to go. The police had her surrounded. "Please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, just let me take him. He's my son. I'm his mother." The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. We have some questions for you down at the station." Charlotte's face crumpled, her shoulders slumping as the fight seemed to drain out of her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something that might have been regret, but it was too late for that. Too late for apologies. Too late for explanations. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to protect him." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The woman standing before me was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. The love, the trust, the life we had shared, it was all gone, shattered by her actions. All that mattered now was Jack and making sure he was safe. The police moved in, gently taking Charlotte by the arm and leading her toward the squad car. She didn't resist, didn't say another word. Her head bowed as they placed her in the back seat. I watched as they closed the door, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions, anger, sorrow, relief, but mostly, I felt empty, as if everything that had once filled my life had been stripped away. As the squad car pulled out of the driveway, I stood up, still holding Jack close. The nanny came over, her eyes filled with concern as she placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." "It's not your fault," I murmured, shaking my head. "You did the right thing. Thank you." She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears as she looked down at Jack. "I'll be here if you need anything. Just focus on Jack, okay?" I nodded, grateful for her support, but I couldn't find the words to respond. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had happened and everything that lay ahead. But as I looked down at Jack, still holding on to me with all the trust in the world, I knew that I had to be strong. I had to fight for him, to protect him no matter what it took. We walked inside the house, eerily quiet after the chaos of the last few days. I closed the door behind us, shutting out the world, and carried Jack upstairs to his room. He was already half asleep, exhausted from everything that had happened. I laid him down gently in his bed, brushing the hair from his forehead as I kissed him goodnight. "I love you, Jack," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm going to take care of you. I promise." He mumbled something in his sleep, his tiny hand reaching out to grab mine. I sat there, holding his hand, watching him breathe, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain: no matter how broken I felt, no matter how much pain I was in, I would fight for Jack. I would protect him from the darkness that had nearly torn our family apart. As I sat in the quiet of his room, I made a vow to myself: Charlotte might have shattered our lives, but I wouldn't let her take Jack from me. I would fight for him with everything I had, and I would rebuild whatever was left of our lives, for him and for the future we both deserved. The days that followed were a whirlwind of police reports, lawyer meetings, and court preparations. The initial belief of having Jack safe at home was soon overshadowed by the legal battle that loomed ahead. Charlotte's actions had set off a chain of events that I could never have anticipated, and as I delved deeper into the situation, I uncovered truths that shook me to my core. The police investigation revealed that Charlotte's actions were part of something far more sinister than I had imagined. The men who had attacked me, who had participated in that nightmarish scene during our so-called honeymoon, were not strangers. They were part of a network involved in criminal activities, and Charlotte, it seemed, had been entangled with them for some time. The details were murky at first, but the more the police dug, the clearer it became that Charlotte's betrayal was not just personal, it was criminal. The day of the court proceedings finally arrived, and I found myself standing in a courtroom that felt both foreign and intimidating. I was no stranger to pressure, but this was different. The weight of what had happened, of everything I had lost, pressed down on me with a force that was almost unbearable. But I had to be strong, for Jack, for our future. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence as the proceedings began. Charlotte sat at the defense table, her once vibrant face now pale and drawn, her eyes hollow. She looked nothing like the woman I had married, the woman I had once loved. Beside her were the men who had beaten me, their expressions ranging from defiant to indifferent. I could barely stand to look at them, the anger and disgust boiling in my veins. The prosecution laid out the case in meticulous detail. The charges against Charlotte and the men were severe: assault, conspiracy, and a list of other crimes that made my stomach turn. As the evidence was presented, it became clear just how deep Charlotte's involvement had been. She had been working with these men for months, if not longer, helping them in their criminal endeavors, using our marriage as a cover for her illicit activities. I listened in stunned silence as the prosecution detailed how Charlotte had helped orchestrate scams, laundering money, and other illegal dealings. The honeymoon was supposed to be the final step in a plan to flee the country with Jack, taking with her a sizable amount of money she had stolen. But it all fell apart when I survived the attack, and she had been forced to flee back home, where the police were waiting for her. When it was my moment to testify, I approached the stand with a blend of apprehension and determination. The events of that night were still painfully vivid, both the physical and emotional wounds were raw. Nevertheless, I recounted my experience in detail: Charlotte's betrayal, the assault, and my fierce effort to protect Jack. I kept my voice calm, concentrating on presenting the facts and ensuring justice was achieved. As I spoke, I felt the weight of the courtroom's gaze and judgment, but it was irrelevant. This wasn't about them, it was about Jack and ensuring he would never endure the consequences of Charlotte's actions. When I finished, I took my seat, drained but relieved that my testimony was complete. The defense attempted to portray Charlotte as a victim, claiming she had been coerced by the men and acted out of fear for her and Jack's safety. Yet, the evidence was compelling. The prosecution dismantled their claims, revealing falsehood after falsehood until the defense's arguments crumbled to mere excuses. After several days of testimony and cross-examination, the judge rendered the verdict: Charlotte and the men were found guilty on all counts. Their sentences were severe: years in prison, with additional time for their roles in the assault and other crimes. The judge emphasized the gravity of their actions, their betrayal, and their lack of remorse. As the sentence was pronounced, I felt a complex mix of relief, sadness, and a sense of closure that was both soothing and painful. Charlotte had once been central to my life, but that person was gone. The woman who had conspired against me and endangered our son was now a stranger, beyond my comprehension. The divorce was finalized shortly after the trial, a stark and emotionless process that lacked the intensity of our former relationship. There were no disputes, no attempts at reconciliation. There was nothing left to salvage. The court awarded me full custody of Jack and terminated Charlotte's parental rights. She would no longer be part of his life, now or ever. As I left the courthouse for the last time, I felt an unusual peace. It wasn't the kind of peace derived from joy or satisfaction, but from the knowledge that a significant chapter had closed and I had endured it. Despite the hell I had gone through, I was still standing, and Jack was safe. That was all that truly mattered. Life after the trial was challenging. There were moments when the painful memories resurfaced unexpectedly, and I would feel the sting of betrayal anew. But Jack was my anchor, my reason for moving forward. We relocated to a new home, away from the site of our turmoil, and I concentrated on rebuilding our lives. Over time, the wounds began to heal. They left marks, both physical and emotional, but they no longer defined me. I learned to be both a father and mother to Jack, providing him with the love and stability he needed. I wasn't perfect, but I did my best, and that was sufficient. The men who had assisted Charlotte with her schemes remained imprisoned, their sentences extended as more of their crimes were uncovered. They belonged to a world I would never understand, one that had nearly destroyed me. But they were now confined, unable to cause further harm. Charlotte was serving her time too, but I no longer thought about her. She was a ghost from my past, a symbol of my survival. But nothing more. I didn't harbor hatred for her anymore. There was no point in hating someone who had already lost everything. Ultimately, what mattered was Jack and the life we were creating together. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was ours, and it was good. We had each other, and that was enough. The past was behind us, the future ahead, and we moved forward one day at a time.